הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות, על הניסים ועל הברכן ועל הגבורות ועל התשועות ועל הנפלאות שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה, בזמן הזה שעשית לאבותינו בימים ההם בזמן הזה.
Welcome to Jewish Life, a program presented in cooperation with the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. I'm your host, Stuart Ain. Every week, we present programs of particular interest to the Jewish community, and today we're going to be speaking about, well, a very special event. Brad Kolodny, he's president of the Jewish Historical Society of Long Island, and he is now inaugurating the Long Island Jewish History Museum in Glen Cove, New York. And in fact, the museum is located at the place we all know, the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center in Nassau County. And with us today is Brad, as well as Dana Arschin. She is a storyteller at the museum. Welcome to you both. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Stuart, thanks for having us. Great to be with you.
And we really appreciate it.
Great. What's the relationship between the museum and the Long Island Historical Museum?
I'll give our brief intro and then I'll let the majority of the interview. So where we are now, HMTC, which stands for Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. We are a tolerance center and a museum, a Holocaust museum in Glen Cove. And we have this special exhibit, which Brad will talk about, coming in for 1 year, all about Jewish history here on Long Island. It's just an incredible partnership. Obviously, our majority of our work is Holocaust education and remembering the victims, honoring the survivors, but we are a Long Island institution, so nothing is more appropriate than Long Island Jewish History exhibit coming in right here. It's such an honor, and we hope that you all will visit us throughout the year.
Good, thank you, Dana. How are you? Okay, Brad, in fact, this new exhibit is all about earning a living, how the Jews earned a living when they came here on Long Island. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. The name of the exhibit is Earning a Living, 300 Years of Jewish Businesses on Long Island. And I think that the main theme here is that most people believe or understand or think that Judaism grew on Long Island, or really Jews only came to Long Island after World War II. And that is absolutely not the case. There were over 4,000 Jews who lived on Long Island even before the end of World War I. So, there's a lot of history to tell. This first exhibit that we have opens October 3rd. And I'm happy to take you through a little bit of a tour of what we have.
Please, yeah. Great, thank you. That'd be great.
Awesome. So at the beginning of the exhibit, we give a little bit of an introduction as to the history of Jewish workers on Long Island, going all the way back to 1705. And the first known Jew to work on Long Island, his name was Nathan Simpson, and he was a shopkeeper in the town of Brookhaven. The exhibit itself, we've divided into 4 parts. As you walk through in a counterclockwise direction, we start with farming, and then we have manufacturing. We also have a miscellaneous category of other occupations. And finally, the largest portion is retail. So maybe if you'd like, I can start at the very beginning with farming, which showcases a number of Jewish farmers who came to Long Island in the early 20th century. You had the Jacob Carlin farm in Talverton. Jacob Carlin grew traditional crops, but you also have dairy farms like the Silverstein brothers, who started the Oak Tree Farm Dairy in Elwood in about 1920. And you also have farmers in Holtzville and farmers even in East Hampton, the Katz family from the 1930s to the 1970s. As we move along past farming, we go into the manufacturing portion of the museum. And what's interesting about the manufacturing is that's what really led to the establishment of Jewish communities on Long Island. The earliest inhabitants of Long Island were really mostly peddlers, and peddlers that were going from place to place didn't have an opportunity to settle in any one community and establish a permanent home. But that changes once you have museums that once you have factories that have opened up in places like Setauket and Sag Harbor and even Patchogue. They each had their own factory where dozens of Jews came to work to earn a living. And we're talking about the period of the 1880s to the early 1900s. And so in each one of those communities, you actually had workers in these factories who banded together to form a congregation and build a synagogue. The very first synagogue on Long Island was built in 1896. A little known fact that a lot of people don't know about, but it was built in Setauket in 1896 by the people who worked in the rubber factory. And two of them, we actually have a photograph of Elias and Rebecca Golden, who worked in the rubber factory in the 1880s and 1890s. In terms of other occupations, not every Jew on Long Island was a merchant or worked in a factory or was a farmer. You also had doctors and teachers and lawyers and people in other occupations. Right here in Glen Cove, we have the record of the first policeman. His name was Izzy Goldstein, and he began in the Glen Cove Police Force in 1943. And here in the museum, we do have a couple of artifacts from Izzy's career here as a policeman in Glen Cove. Another interesting person who is not very well known, his name is George Morton Levy. He was born in 1888, became an attorney in Freeport, and is most known for starting the Roosevelt Raceway track. The harness racing track in 1940 was started by George Morton Levy. And now the largest part of the museum, or I should say the most items that are on display, is about the retail portion of earning a living on Long Island. You know, not everything that we talk about has to be super old. There is a restaurant that you, Stuart, might remember called Wetson's. Wetson's was started by a Jewish entrepreneur named Herb Wettinson, and he opened up a fast food restaurant called Wetson's in 1959 in Levittown. That franchise grew to 71 different locations in the New York tri-state area, and a lot of people will remember Wetson's from their youth. On display here, we have a really interesting map of the downtown business district of Freeport from the year 1924. I think a lot of people will be surprised to learn that between Sunrise Highway and Merrick Road on South Main Street in Freeport, in 1924, 30% of the businesses in that area were Jewish-owned stores. 1924. So you had businesses of all kinds that were owned by Jews, whether it was a shoe store, a paint store, a clothing store, the movie theater, and just a whole host of restaurants and butchers, etc. That was Freeport in 1924. A piece of more modern history is the story of the Fortunoff family. They moved their retail store from Brooklyn, which started in the 1920s, and moved to Westbury, opening up a very large location in 1964. And this is a photograph of the opening of that store and the ribbon cutting by the patriarch of the Fortunoff family, Max Fortunoff. And I'll tell you one more story before I send it back to you if you'd like to ask more questions. This is the story of Harry Brous. Harry Brous was a liquor store owner. He opened his liquor store in Glen Cove in 1912. Now, in 1920, the 18th Amendment was passed that banned the sale of alcohol. So what did Harry do? He sold liquor illegally. He was a bootlegger. And what he did was selling alcohol to the wealthy mansion owners on the Gold Coast. He would actually go out by boat into Hempstead Harbor and sell the alcohol without being watched by policemen. He also manufactured his own alcohol in his sister's home, which was located in Seacliff. His sister was Rebecca Raff, and Rebecca Raff ran a dry cleaning store with her husband. Her husband passed away in 1914, and Rebecca, a bit of a Renaissance woman of her day, she ran the tailor shop and dry cleaning business for 40 years, from 1914 to 1954.
So how far up do you go at the Historical Museum? How many years? Where do you stop?
Well, we don't stop. We actually go right up until today. We have a historic artifact from Bagel Boss, which is still going. There are 15 Bagel Boss locations. It started in 1975 in Hicksville by the Rosner family.
Right, right. And now, I mean, there's been an evolution of the Jewish community on the island. We're seeing more and more synagogues merging, going out of business. Are we losing the Jewish population, or what's happening, or becoming less observant? How do you see it?
It's a great question. The fact of the matter is that the Jewish population on Long Island is over 300,000 today. And that really has not decreased that significantly over the last couple of decades. But what we hear a lot about in our local communities is that particularly conservative and reform synagogues are closing at a very alarming rate. Since 1995, in about the last 20 to 25 years, there has been the closing or merging of a synagogue at more than one per year. So while the Jewish population itself has maintained its number, the affiliation has declined. And so you have younger people not joining synagogues at the same rate that their parents and their grandparents did. And there's another interesting thing to be mentioned about that number, 300,000 Jews on Long Island today. Long Island is the fourth largest Jewish community in the United States today. And I think for a really long time, and by the way, New York City, Los Angeles, and Southern Florida are the top three. Long Island as number 4 is seen, I think, a little bit as an outgrowth of New York City. You have a lot of people living on Long Island who are working in Manhattan, myself included, and therefore I think the Jewish community of Long Island has been overlooked in terms of the American Jewish landscape and has not been given its due for its rich history that has existed for 300 years. And that's one of the most important things that I think we're going to bring to light here at this exhibit is the rich history of Long Island Jews living in Nassau and Suffolk counties for the last 300 years.
When did we get up to the 300,000? How long did it take to get to that number?
Well, it was really an outgrowth of World War II, and the post-World War II era was when things began to really grow. And I can give you a really interesting statistic on the number of Jews. In 1930, there were 6,000 Jews living in Nassau County, and they made up just 1.9% of the population. 30 years later, in 1960, there were 327,000 Jews just in Nassau County, and they made up 26.5% of the population of Nassau County. So you go from 2 Jews out of every 100 citizens in 1930 to 1 in 4 in 1960.
And today, what do you guess?
300, about 300,000.
Yeah. Well, they're going to do, I think, a new population survey. And I guess they're doing it this year, right? The UJA Federation does.
You
Yeah.
did a survey a couple of years ago, right?
Every 10 years they do it. And yeah, so we'll see. And the idea that synagogues are closing, is this part of the national trend where all religions are seeing fewer and fewer people going to church, going to synagogue, what have you? Is that right?
You are absolutely right. It is definitely a trend across religion. There are churches that are also, having difficult times and closing the same way that synagogues are. And while this is, I think seen on a grander scale on Long Island because of our large Jewish population, it is definitely happening in other parts of the country as well.
Let me point out that Brad is also the author of The Jews of Long Island, 1705 to 1918. So he knows of what he's speaking. It's published by SUNY Press. And he took pictures of all the existing shuls, or when they existed at that point back in 2019. It is called Seeking Sanctuary, 125 years of synagogues on Long Island. How many of those synagogues are still around?
Great question. There are currently 215 synagogues on Long Island in both Nassau and Suffolk County. There are more in Nassau because of the population and the high concentration of Jews living in the 5 towns. The 5 towns area has 50 synagogues. And
yeah, that is the one area that has grown. Yeah, that is the one area, and it's an Orthodox area, and that's, I guess, why it's grown. Am I right?
Absolutely, yeah. The Orthodox community in those towns of Cedarhurst, Lawrence, and Hewlett have really grown their population, as has Great Neck. The story of the growth of the Jewish community in Great Neck is a little bit different because you have a very large Persian population in Great Neck. That actually started in 1979 after the rise of power of the Ayatollah Khomeini. A lot of Jews started leaving Iran, came to the United States, and settled in Great Neck. And
California. And California. Right. Yes.
But in terms of Great Neck, today in Great Neck, you have 22 synagogues.
Of the 200.
How many are Persian?
Long Island?
That's right.
How many of them are Persian?
How many of them are Persian? Well, I would say probably close to half.
Yeah.
But you have the Iranian Jewish Center. You have a couple of Mashhadi synagogues, which are, Mashhad is a city in Iran. You have a Syrian synagogue. You have a Sephardic synagogue. But then you also have Chabad, and you have 2 Reform congregations, as well as conservative and Orthodox synagogues in Great Neck as well.
Wow. Yeah, it's incredible. And the 5 towns really started to develop, I guess, in the 1960s, 70s or so, right? And it was kind of swift too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I would say even later than that. I mean, you had the Young Israel of Woodmere. There are congregations that was founded in the 5 towns. And I think it was really more after the 1990s where that area began to become much more Orthodox.
Right, and now it's certainly thriving.
Yeah.
We're talking about 5 towns, so we're talking about Woodmere, Lawrence, Cedarhurst.
I believe.
Yeah.
I believe Inwood and Hewlett are the 5. Yeah. And
I guess
of the 50 synagogues, you have 1 that is Reform and 2 that are conservative. Everything else is an Orthodox synagogue.
Right. I'm not quite sure. Those the Reform, I believe, now has a JCC in it, doesn't it now?
The JCC, I believe the scenario was that the JCC purchased the building of Temple Israel in Lawrence, but the congregation still exists in the building.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I knew there was a relationship there. Right. So what would you say the most observant are the Orthodox, and they continue to thrive not only from the 5 towns, but elsewhere as well?
Absolutely, yeah. There are certain communities that have become more Orthodox. Even, I mentioned Great Neck, but you have Long Beach and you also have West Hempstead. So both, have grown in their, more traditional Jewish observance, and the people who have moved there, have led to growth in the Orthodox population in those towns.
Yes, in fact, there was Chabad in Long Beach, you mentioned. They just moved to open in Atlantic Beach, and the village of Atlantic Beach just tried to buy the land. They went to court, and the judge said, no, you can't do that. They bought the land, and you should have, they tried to get it through eminent domain. They lost. And
Wow.
The judge said, they have a very good case here. And so that suggests that they're not going to be able to appeal successfully. So the Chabad of the Beaches is now, it's right next to the Atlantic Beach Bridge, and you'll see them thriving down there as well.
Yeah, a lot
Very
of
interesting.
A lot
Very
of
interesting.
locations on Long Island as well. 37, I believe, is
No,
the,
at
is the
40.
latest number.
40 now. They're up to 40.
40, okay.
Yeah, they're doing very well. They're doing very well, and they're thriving. They really are. They're and they're reaching not just Orthodox people. They're reaching basically Jewish people who are largely unaffiliated.
That's exactly right. And Rabbi Tuvia Teldin, who is the administrative head of Chabad for Long Island, has been there since the beginning. He started the very first Chabad location in Stony Brook back in 1977. And here we are almost 50 years later, and he has been able to grow the footprint of what Chabad has been able to offer to Jewish residents on Long Island to, like you said, 40 different locations today.
Right, all the way from Atlantic Beach Bridge, all the way out to the Hamptons.
All the way to Montauk. All the way to Montauk.
Montauk.
Yes.
And he and Chaya, I have to give Chaya credit too. It's always a teamwork that the Chabad works with. And
Like you and Merrill, great team.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting how the community here has changed. We used to have more kosher facilities, but what's happened to that? Kosher delis have basically disappeared except for Ben's.
It's true. I live in Plainview, and when I moved in 1997, there were 3 kosher delis just in Plainview. And
Right.
from what I'm hearing, next month, there will be 0 because the last kosher deli in
Regal?
Regal Deli is closing.
Oh, I didn't know. I saw that they were staying on. I didn't know they were gonna. Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Yes.
Wow. Wow. Well, they held out a long time. So
Yes.
it's just gonna be Ben's now. So
Woodbury,
what
Email, and some other locations. That one.
yeah, right. So what would you attribute that?
I think it's just, part of the trend of less Jewish affiliation, less of a focus on the previous generation that, were very focused on being kosher, which I think is now, maybe less important to the next generation. So I think that's part of it. I think it's just a trend of, restaurants in general. I think is part of it that, there are restaurants, there are other places in Plainview that are closing. So just one of those things that, time marches on and change happens.
Well, put your soothsayer hat on. What would you see happening with synagogues? Do you foresee more mergers, more synagogues closing?
I hate to say it, but I do. I think that the synagogue population is going to continue to decrease. I think there are some natural synergies in terms of synagogues in certain communities that could merge with each other to serve their communities better. What's going to happen is really anyone's guess, but if I'm put on the spot to ask, I do think that that's going to be a trend that continues, but who knows? The evolution of Jewish life could change again and see an upswing. And, we certainly hope that ends up being the case.
There's also a suggestion that COVID has really hurt synagogues. Many people, because of COVID, have had any kind of relationship with the synagogue has been through Zoom, and services and the conservative and reform communities have been on Zoom. And as I just wrote a story about the fact that although for 2022, synagogues are looking to welcome congregants back again, and that they'll probably have more congregants than they did last year, many congregants won't go because of COVID. And one synagogue, they told me that they usually set up for 2,000 chairs. They're going to put up 1,000 chairs this year.
Wow. Yeah, I think the high holiday season of 2022 is going to be a very telling inflection point. Are people going to come back from Zoom? Are people going to look for that in-person communication and community feel that they haven't necessarily had in the past few years? It remains to be seen.
Yeah, the socialization really has been critical for sustaining synagogues. And now that they're there, we've got about 3 minutes, I'm told. 3 minutes. Okay, so now that they're there, some people are saying, you know what? We haven't been in a synagogue for 3 years. We're not even going to bother renewing our membership anymore. And some synagogues are dropping all fees now. Could come in for the high holidays, no charge.
Yeah, listen, synagogues are doing what they can to retain their membership. And I would bring it back to the Jewish Historical Society of Long Island to say that we're offering something new to the Long Island Jewish community, something that hasn't been discussed before, something that hasn't been written before. And maybe it's another touch point that gives individuals a reason to be proud of their Jewish heritage and gives them a reason to, want to learn more and wanting to be more connected to their heritage and to their culture and perhaps to their religious beliefs as well.
In the 2 minutes we have left, was after you go from here, this is for 1 year. Are you still looking for other sites, or is this going to be a one-time thing?
We've struck up a great relationship with the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center here in Glen Cove. Andrea Bolender has, as the chair of the board, was very gracious to invite us at the Jewish Historical Society to create this exhibit. And so the 1 year time frame, I think, is just going to be a measure of how much interest we're able to generate. I'm very confident that we will bring a whole host of new visitors to the Holocaust Center here in Glen Cove. And after a year's time, we'll speak with Andrea. She's been very gracious and has said that, we'll revisit in another year. But, I could foresee potentially a very long-term relationship.
In the last 40 seconds or so, do you just want to say, what do you hope people get out of this museum?
Yeah, I think it comes down to 2 words: pride and wow. The wow factor of visiting our museum and seeing the items that you have seen already on this program, seeing them in person, reading the stories about the individuals. You're not just looking at an item. There is a story behind the item, a Jewish story with family and history and reasons for why people decided to live in Nassau or Suffolk counties. And the other is pride. It's the wow factor, and it's pride. Pride in being Jewish, pride in being from Long Island, and taking pride in the new knowledge that you'll learn once you come and visit our exhibit called Earning a Living: 300 Years of Jewish Businesses on Long Island, here at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County in Glen Cove. The exhibit opens on October 3rd, and it will run for at least 6 months. We may decide to change out the exhibit and bring in something new.
Great, thank you. Brad Kolodny, he's president of the Jewish Historical Society of Long Island. My name is Stuart Ain. Until next week, have a good one.